Welcome to Deep Dives into the Bible, where we take our time and go deeply into God's Word. I am Father Michael Nasser from St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We are here with members of our St. Nicholas family and happy you've joined us. Here's today's conversation. All right, good to be back together. Here comes some of our online folks. Let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind with the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of the gospel teachings. Implant in us all the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things as are well pleasing unto thee. For thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and unto thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father, who is from everlasting, and all holy and good and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Good morning. All right. Well, today is sort of a turning point in our journey. Turn this off. So we have been following in Matthew's Gospel the story of who Jesus is and what he does and what he teaches. And in many ways, this is where it's all been coming to as we go into chapter 26. These are the last days of what we would call Holy Week. It's the days of his passion, leading to his crucifixion and resurrection. What I think I just want to say as introduction is rarely do we hear what we're going to be reading and studying with the same degree of awareness of what came before it. And I think that's really important to do. We hear the scriptures normally in sections. We don't hear it beginning to end. And we've not been, obviously reading this recently beginning to end, but as best you can, keep an eye and an ear towards what brought us to here in his gospel that we might have missed if we were just seeing this. In other words, we're going to read chapter 26. As we read chapter 26, keep in mind the things that we've talked about for the previous chapters, because that's how it's written. We've always said the Bible study is the idea of trying to get mainly what's there. Yes, footnotes can help, and commentary can help, and cultural context can help, but everything we need to get is already there. And we normally get it from the section we're looking at. And so what I'm encouraging us to do is, as we hear these very familiar sections, keep in mind what's led before us, because Matthew didn't write separate things. He wrote a book, a story, that this is the next part in it. Any questions about that? All right, so let's go into this with Matthew 26. Would somebody read for us verses 1 through 5?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people."
Okay. So it begins when Jesus had finished these sayings. Of course, we've just been studying the recent sayings from, especially from chapter 25. Right there, you have already a connection that this is not just, some things are going to happen. There's already, as Matthew is writing this, there's a connection. When Jesus had finished these things, then he says to the disciples, after 2 days, the Passover is coming, and the Son may deliver to be crucified. I don't remember when the last one of these was, but we've had several of these, right? This is not the first time he's been preparing the disciples for this. It's the last time because it's about to happen now. Is there a connection we can see already just in verses 1 and 2 between the sayings and what Jesus is telling them is about to happen? Let's just look at chapter 25, for example. We had 3 different stories, 2 parables, and then a prophecy. What was in common about all of those? Bridegroom,
Being prepared,
master.
being prepared because he's coming,
Okay.
And that he's going away.
right?
First, somebody goes away, then they come back. So when he finishes sayings and he says, after 2 days this Passover coming, the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. Already, because we're looking at it in context, we hear that differently. This is not just him saying, this is about to happen. He's finished the sayings where that's in their mind. So already we're seeing that we're going to see what he's been teaching played out. And one way he's going to be going away is he's going to be delivered up to be crucified. Does that change how we understand his coming passion and crucifixion? Any bit? Does it look at it any different?
Because it's ready to happen now. I mean, we're to the point where it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, before when he kept saying it, and I do have a question. He was saying that to the disciples all the time. Were they understanding? Were they understanding that he was telling them this is what's going to happen? Did they believe that? We don't know.
We don't know. What we know of is as Matthew records it, there's a connection. Did they get the connection? We don't get to go and ask them yet. Someday, maybe. But we can make the connection. We don't know what they did. Can we make the connection? When he tells them the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified, and we make the connection to Matthew 25, what part of Matthew 25 or what aspects of what happened in Matthew 25 do we connect?
Does it mean that he is all 3 of these? The bridegroom, the master, and the judge?
Seems that way. It seems that one thing I think we can take out of it is he's now saying, I'm going away. Now, he didn't say how he comes back, although depending how you define going away and coming back, crucified can be going away. Crucified can also be coming back. Right? So it's not like necessarily it's like, well, this mean is this one event. Well, we know he's going to be taken and he's going to come back. Is it the first time in the sense of the crucifixion or resurrection? Is the second coming? You could probably make either argument. And in a sense, those teachings tell us about both. If the crucifixion is him coming back, what does that change in terms of what he's telling the disciples? What should they be doing if his coming back is the crucifixion?
They should be looking forward to it. They should live as if what was immediately in front of them was not the whole story.
Right. And what we're going to see is they didn't. They didn't.
They didn't get it.
Not to that point. And as we've made the point all the way through, the disciples in Matthew and all the Gospels are not portrayed as we might put them in the icon. This is not their perfected state. This is not their glorified, purified. This is them bungling it like we bungle it. Yeah. So he predicts it. He tells them what's going to happen. What does he tell them is about to happen? He tells them 2 things. One thing they knew, one thing they didn't know, but he's telling them both.
He tells them he's gonna be crucified.
Yeah, so that's the part they didn't know.
Passover.
And he,
With that, Elaine?
Passover.
Yeah, you guys both get credit for that. All right, now we could just say, well, he's just giving them two different pieces of information. They're not connected. It's possible. Can we make a connection? Why might those two things be related?
Passover,
Yeah,
because we don't have our Easter until they do the Passover. Because he still celebrated the Passover.
Passover required blood.
yeah, so what's the Passover? The Passover is the celebration of the commemoration, or I'm sorry, a celebration of the event of the people of Israel being taken by God miraculously out of bondage in Egypt, and they begin their journey to the promised land. Right? Remember the night, and it was after the plagues, and Moses told them all, put the blood on the door, eat the Passover lamb, eat quickly, put your shoes on, you're about to be delivered. That's Passover, right? And for those of us in Orthodoxy, Passover, the Greek word is Pascha. So same word, just translated differently in English, but it's the same word. After 2 days, the Pascha is coming. Did that tell you? It made it a little different, right? And the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. So he's making a connection. I mean, it's just inherent in what he's saying. We might miss it. We might say, oh, this event is in 2 days, like calendar update. Don't forget what happens this day. He's telling them the Passover is coming and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified.
How soon after Passover did Moses and the Jews leave?
Next day.
The very next day?
I think so. I can't remember. I have to go back and look, but I think so.
Because they were so attuned to Passover, the blood of the lamb over the doors will save them.
Mhm.
He's, I think, maybe letting them know that the blood of the lamb, he is the Lamb of God, and he will shed his blood and it will save them.
Yeah, without laying it all out as clearly as you did. Yeah, I think that's what he's connecting, or at least he's bringing them together. He's just saying these two things are happening. This one, this one is what's about to happen. He's connecting.
Right.
Yeah. Now, for us, again, we could speculate what the disciples understood. What's really important is what do we understand, and that is that what's coming here as the text develops is not just what it looks like, right? If he just said, in 2 days, the Son of Man will be delivered to be crucified. As the disciples reacted, well, that's terrible. That's the worst thing ever. He's going to be killed. He's defeated. It's all over. It's all lost, right? But that's not how the story is going to progress. And by even just connecting it to the Passover, he's already hinting like that's not the end of the story. All right, any questions on that? Then the chief priests, the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and took counsel together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. We've been seeing some tension develop all through the story between Jesus and the religious leaders and the elders. Why have they come to this point? What brought them to the point where they just need to get rid of him?
Is it Lazarus? The raising of Lazarus.
So in Matthew, we don't have that. In John, yeah, it's clear that in John, he raises Lazarus, the fame is there, and we see the connection. Matthew doesn't have that, interestingly enough.
What do you think?
Hmm?
It's
Why do
the
you think?
power.
What do you mean?
It's the growing power that they see, the growing sizes increasing sizes of the followers, people who gather around. And anyone with power doesn't want to give up power, lose power.
Yeah.
So they will challenge the one who they feel is challenging them.
Yeah. Yeah. So by being stuck in their perspective, right? He's a threat to them and their power. They're blinded and not be able to see what's really right in front of them. What's right in front of them is the one who is there for whose salvation? Even theirs.
Right.
But they don't recognize it because they've got higher priorities.
So much of it, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Susie.
It seems as if so much of it is hard to comprehend. Today, we have the perspective of being able to look back, but for them to look ahead and understand, I mean, Father, even us with all the preaching, all the teaching, all the documents, our full understanding is going to take our lifetime and beyond. And even, you said Matthew didn't refer to the raising of Lazarus, but they saw plenty of miracles, plenty.
Yeah.
And it's like a news story, you're only as good as your last news story, or
Yeah.
you're only as good as your last miracle, It's
Right.
like how short our memories
Yeah.
as a people are.
Yeah.
And Father, to have the ability to fully grasp it is a gift. It truly is a gift. And, our Bible studies, of course, help us to do that. I'm not sure if they had an equivalent back in their day. They had Jesus Christ trying to teach them.
Right in front of them.
Right.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a gift. And I think one of the points of Matthew is everybody is being presented with this gift, right? They got it in a certain context, right? And some of us might say, only if I got to be there, then I would really respond. I would be convinced, I would change. And they might say, oh, only if we knew what was going to happen for 2,000 years and the martyrs, and oh, if only we knew that. Everybody has the chance to make the excuse, but we also have to do what you're saying, so to realize we've got a gift here. And I think the difficult thing is, like any gift, it's presented to you. What defines a gift? Something given to you that you decide, are you going to receive it? Right? The context doesn't determine it, right? Sometimes people are angry with each other, and sometimes people have all kinds of reasons not to receive a gift, but a gift is offered, and another person, right? I don't know if you all watched the news last night. You see two people who have insulted each other for years, right? Two presidents, one sitting, one former, about to be the president. And they offer each other a handshake. And everyone's like, what do you mean you're shaking hands? You said this about him. Yeah, but he said that about the other one. They decided to give each other a gift. But the other one had to decide to accept it. Right? That meeting could have gone very differently if either one said, I'm not taking your hand. Right? Or I'm not going to tell you this, or I'm not going to say welcome, or I'm not going to say thank. But they both had a chance. And that's where I think that Matthew's story is so impactful on us, hopefully, is reminding us that we do have this option. That the same Christ who's for us, not in the ways that we might think we need, right? But in all the ways that we actually need. And it really comes back to, we've been given a gift, are we going to open it and make it ours? So we see how the fear of losing their power, their jealousy, whatever else might be going on, and you can kind of see illustrated in verse 5. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. What's that about?
Would there be more people in the area?
Yeah.
Because it is the feast?
Yeah. So in a Jewish feast like the Passover, there's only one place you celebrate it, and that's at the temple. So you hear in Matthew and other Gospels, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the feast, a different feast. But that's where people went. So the city is now swollen with people from all over the place who are there because of the feast. And they say, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. So what was their plan? In verse 5. They're going to arrest him. They're going to do it quietly. They're going to kill him. But what?
After the feast.
After the feast. Okay. We'll see if they keep their plan.
And
Yeah.
how long does the feast last?
That's a good question. It was several days before and then the actual feast. So it was like a period, but it's sort of like when we celebrate any feast. There's like the pre-feast and the celebrate, and then maybe some post. I don't know how many days. I don't know, but the process of gathering for it has already happened. We can't do this now because it's 2 days away. But they're saying not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. You can say something.
Yeah, back to the question of why did they kill him? And I don't know if Matthew brings this out. I think we did discuss that Jesus actually claimed to be God, which is blasphemy, which in Jewish law does carry the death penalty, right? Of course, they weren't able to just kill somebody on their own because they were occupied by Rome. And so they had to invoke or try to come up with
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, yes, he didn't dispute the fact that he was from God, but he goes out of his way not to make that like, he could have showed up and said, I'm the son of God, right? And a lot of things he does, he says, don't tell people about this. He talks in parables a lot, so he didn't hide it. But I would say, especially earlier as the story develops, he's forthcoming. It's not like his leading message, put it that way.
It's not his leading message.
Yeah.
But he did at some point say something, I am.
I am the son.
Yeah. Again, what John does that more. John is really clear about this whole, I am the door, I am the good shepherd, I am. Matthew, that's not his problem. And it's there. I mean, and it's important because sometimes people say, well, Jesus never claimed to be the Son of God. Not true. In every gospel, he makes that claim clearly, just not loudly. Clear enough that if you're looking for it, it's offered to you again as this gift. You want to see it, it's there, but not like in your face. Now, was that because he didn't want to hasten what's about to happen? Could be. Eventually, it's out and people could make their choice.
You don't want to spoil the plot. I mean, it's the story. He's the main character, but maybe if he said it right from the beginning, then nobody would, have believed him.
That could be. Yeah.
And did you say that Matthew did not write about Lazarus?
Mm-mm.
And do we know why?
Mm-mm. Yeah. So it's a good point, a good time to remember. The Gospels were not an attempt to record in the sense of like a video camera. It's not, okay, I'm going to tell you my perspective to say what happened, right?
Okay.
Somebody asked the other day about a literal sense. A literal sense. We talked about a literal sense before. So when we think of what's the literal sense, you read the Bible literally, right? A lot of people say you have to take the Bible literally. And if you ask what that means, they'll tell you that it's what actually happened, right? So there's an actually happened version of something, and then there's a text that tells you about that thing. And we think that's literal truth, right? There's a cup on the table, and I'm going to say there's a white cup on the table with green writing. That's the literal truth. Only that's not what literal means. What's the root of the word literal?
I know that now.
Literature. Okay, now we know who it was. I couldn't remember. So what is literal is not, oh, there's this thing that happened and I'm going to write about it. The literal truth is what the person wrote. Right? So if I'm Matthew and I write my letter, my gospel, what's the literal truth? It's what I wrote. So our question is, yeah, but why didn't you write about Lazarus? Because in his literal truth, that wasn't necessarily a part of the story. Now, he's not saying Jesus didn't raise Lazarus. He's saying in Matthew's literal truth, that's not in my literature. Because Matthew, like all the writers, like every writer, has a story to tell and a point to make. And he didn't need to make that point. Why he didn't, we have no idea. Yeah, in fact, only in John, I think, is the raising of Lazarus, which is interesting. In John, it's such a pivotal event.
Sometimes in literary analysis too, you talk about the gravity of the missing character. And so I think that that fits in with Lazarus and also with the Romans in the background. There's a huge force behind these 5 lines that aren't necessarily written there literally. So.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and we'll see where the Romans come in. They've played very little role so far. Right. There was a centurion, but he comes to faith, right?
And he cured the mother-in-law, right?
What's that?
He cured the mother-in-law.
The mother. Oh no,
The Roman, but
the serpent.
yeah, the Roman. No, there wasn't there?
Peter's mother-in-law, right?
The mother-in-law of the Roman. Whether it was a servant or a
It was
centurion.
the servant's
Mother-in-law.
or the centurion's servant. I don't remember the.
Oh, the
centurion.
mother-in-law, Peter.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Well, somebody got cured.
Yeah, I think they both.
So can I ask another question
Yeah.
regarding that? So
Yeah.
it's not so much the facts of what's there, it's how the writer is putting the story together from their perspective.
Yes. That's all we have. Now, again, because we live in a video recording, heavily recorded and what's the word I'm looking for? Verified, right? At least we think so. That's the illusion, right? But the idea is there's some reality, and then we'll see how close somebody gets to the reality. Literature doesn't work that way. Literature says, I'm going to write you a story. What's the literal truth? What I wrote. And what I did write you, right? And actually, we've seen this lately because with this idea of fake news was a concept that grabbed a hold of us because we realized, wait a minute, we thought that if it was on the news, if we saw a video or heard a recording or heard a report, then it always had to be true because that's what the news is. Then we learned that, oh, wait a minute, something else can be going on.
Editing.
Right. And so even in a video, audio recorded age, even in an internet age, we're back to saying the only thing we know is what we're reading. And then we have to decide, do we trust this source? Do we trust a different source? Because we don't have access to what they saw. Right. And
Father,
that's, yeah.
sorry, did I interrupt you? I'm
No,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I like to correlate that to if there's a bunch of people around and there's been an accident. And so the police interview different people and the different people see the accident from different perspectives. And that's kind of how I look at the Gospels, that Matthew has seen from his perspective and John and the others have seen from a different perspective.
Right. And that's a good point, and I'll add to it. Their perspective is not accidental, right? It's not like, okay, there were 3 of us on 3 different corners that witnessed a collision in the intersection. And because we're on different corners, we're going to see it differently. That's true. They had different points of view. But the part I think we don't often understand is intentionally they write their story in their way to tell their story as they're choosing to tell it. Right? If Matthew just somehow never heard about Lazarus, we'd say, well, in Matthew's gospel, there's no raising of Lazarus because he didn't know about it. Well, he did know about it. If we believe that Matthew was where Matthew says Matthew was, and if we believe that John was where Matthew says Matthew was, he knew about it. Right? So why doesn't he write about it? We don't know. But what we don't want to say is, well, he just missed it or he forgot.
So he had a reason.
He had a
to
reason.
write about it. He
Exactly.
wrote about not Martha and Mary when they visited and the one was running around. He wrote about that.
Hmm.
So it is curious why he did not include
Right,
Lazarus.
right. And the only answer is, he knows why.
And we have to figure it out.
No,
We just
We-
take
that-
it for what it's. what we're reading.
exactly.
Okay.
What is Matthew? We could wonder why Matthew didn't write it. What we know is Matthew didn't write it. Matthew wrote what Matthew wrote. And therefore, we're not trying to figure out why he did say this or didn't say that. What we're actually saying is, what did he say? That's what Matthew's trying to get across. Yeah.
Matthew did talk about people being raised from the dead,
Yes.
or, but just different people.
Right. Right.
The, there was a boy or the girl,
Hmm.
you
The
know,
child, yeah.
Yep.
child.
Right.
I don't remember if there were others, but, and when the disciples were sent out, did they raise anybody from the dead, or am I thinking of?
Not in the Gospels. In Acts, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that I remember in the Gospels. Yeah, so again, if we can just keep focusing on transferring where we see truth is. It's not, there's a truth out there. Let's see what Matthew tells us about that truth, and we'll see what John's trying to say. Matthew's gospel is Matthew's truth that he says to us, take it or leave it. This is my truth. Stop trying to figure out what I did or didn't say. Figure out what I'm saying, because he wrote what he wrote for reasons. Again, we don't need to know the reasons. We need to know the point of the reasons. We don't know what. We need to know what he's saying. And that's as close as we get. By the way, we're going to see how, as the aftermath of the crucifixion, his death, in the resurrection, and the other gospels get a little more into this, Jesus is upset, not because somebody saw him risen from the dead and didn't believe. Right? Jesus gets upset when somebody told someone else Jesus rose from the dead and they didn't believe. Right? It's not, in other words, Jesus' assumption is not that you get to see it face to face. Jesus' assumption is someone's going to tell you something, and your job is to believe what they tell you if they're the source that you're choosing to believe in. Because you don't get direct access to what happened. You get somebody's account. And it's not just the eyewitness account, it's the story as they're choosing to write it. All right, let me read you a couple, at least one commentary on this. This comes on the fact that he will be delivered up. This is again from Origen, not saying we've canonized, but wrote a lot of really good things about the scriptures. He therefore used the verb impersonally, that is, he will be delivered up. He did not say by whom, because the words apply to all those who delivered him up. But not everyone delivered him up in the same way. God delivered him up out of mercy for the human race. He, quote, has not spared even his own son, but delivered him for us all. That comes from Romans. But the rest delivered him up for a bad reason, each one according to his own malice. Judas out of greed, the priest out of jealousy, and the devil out of fear. Lest the human race be plucked from his hands because of Christ's teaching, little knowing that the human race we plucked away more through his death than through his teaching and miracles. He was in fact delivered up to be crucified, so that, quote, disarming the principalities and powers, he might triumph over them on the cross. It's interesting that he talks about, even just that phrase, delivered up. We might say, okay, it just means that, he's going to get arrested, but people like Origen and others see so much more in the fact that it's not spelled out, but that could imply a whole lot of different things. But it's significant. All right, let's keep going. We'll see how far we get, but let's tackle the next section. If somebody would read for us, unless any question or comment, we move on. All right, would somebody read 6 through 16? Anyone?
I can read again.
All right, thank you.
And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. And when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him.
All right. So Bethany, for those who don't know, Bethany is a town very close to Jerusalem. So he's at Bethany. This man, Simon the leper, we never hear of before, but for some reason Matthew wants to include him in there. What's interesting about that?
You're not supposed to have anything to do with lepers.
Right. Yeah. Now, was he a cured leper? I don't remember. I don't remember hearing about that. But the assumption is not.
I
It
wonder
says in
if
the note,
Yeah.
must have been healed by Jesus earlier.
Yeah.
Lepers were forbidden to live in town.
Right.
I wonder if he's the one that came back. to
Oh.
thank Jesus.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, probably been healed. Not necessarily. It doesn't say that. And we haven't talked about names for a long time, but names are always important in the Bible. And again, when we think about what the Bible's teaching us, it's a story that isn't twisting the truth as much as its story is the truth, right? Why might it be significant that this man's name is Simon?
It's close to Simeon.
Close to Simeon. Who else is Simon in the story?
Peter.
Peter. And what's Peter's story in Matthew?
I'm not sure, but is that when Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Son of God"?
Yeah, so he was a fisherman.
Yeah.
At his meeting, I think this is in Matthew, he doesn't feel worthy, and Christ makes him worthy and says, "You're going to be a fisher of men." So there was Simon's past, and then Simon's future. In fact, his future is so different, he's given a new name, right? He's given the name Peter. So when you hear a name, it doesn't mean anything necessarily, but it's always good to consider what might the connection be, right? Father David talked a few weeks ago in his homily about Jesus telling the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And as Father David pointed out, normally in parables, characters don't get a name. In fact, I think that's the only one in Luke's gospel where somebody in the parable actually gets a name. So the poor man sitting outside the rich man's house is Lazarus, which we've been talking about. There's a significance to that name. And it's not coincidental in the sense that that's the man who dies and he goes and he's in Abraham's bosom, and the rich man goes into torture and he's in flame and he says, "Send Lazarus down." So again, keep an eye on names. They don't, it's not always clear why the person has a name, but sometimes there are perhaps insights to things we can make connections with. All right, what happens next? He's in the house of Simon the leper. What happens? A strange occurrence. Again, not strange for us. We've heard the story 100 times.
Yeah.
What's really strange about this if we see it with fresh eyes?
The woman pouring oil on his head.
Yeah.
And that's what for? Why'd she do that?
Can you imagine? You're at a dinner party, somebody walks in, pours a bottle of perfume on somebody's head.
Well, he knew why,
Yeah,
so it doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter, but it's important that we recognize this was unusual. In fact, it's so confusing that the disciples see it and they're indignant.
But we already know that the oil is precious, it's expensive, and they do use it for funerals. We already know that.
Right. But what do the disciples not know?
They're thinking about money,
Yeah.
that they could give it to the
And
poor.
so Jesus is going to correct them, right?
In
So,
the-
yeah. No, go ahead.
In the Old Testament, the fragrant oil is also used in the sacrificial system.
In what sense?
I can't explain all that.
Well, but your point is, yeah, he's about to be sacrificed, and that he tells them, she's done this for my burial. He's sitting there living. He's already told them what's going to happen. They're obviously still very confused about it, which of course they would be. And he says that she's done it for my burial. I mean, that's shocking. If somebody came in and they started anointing me, and I said, "Don't worry, this is for my burial." Again, I want us to get the shock back in that we would have had if we've not heard this 100 times. It's shocking that she does it. Shocking what he says. But they're not shocked. Or at least they're shocked, but not to seeing more clear. They're seeing less clearly. What does that tell us about encountering Jesus as we've been encountering him, other than encountering him in the gospel? What's always sort of the choice? Either he says something or he does something. In this case, something does something to him. What's the choice?
You can believe him or you can rationalize what it actually looks like to how you think it could be like, that's just waste. But
Yeah.
So the conflict between what's in your mind, trying to figure it all out for what you're seeing, but also the why as to the understanding of having that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. And where does that bigger picture come? Who provides it?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah, but the woman too,
Yeah.
because she knows.
She knows.
She's got the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And the disciples are just thinking very narrow-mindedly.
And we don't know in Matthew's gospel who she is, why she's doing this. Right? Other gospels there's more backstory to it. But the choice is always, are these people around Jesus going to figure out for themselves who he is? Or are they going to ask him and take his explanation? That's always the choice, which is why in Matthew, I think we made this point before, two things are happening at the same time. We're watching people interact with Jesus, and we're watching very different choices, how they do that and what they do about it. And while that's happening, what else is happening? What's the other level of what's happening when we read Matthew? The very same thing.
Just from the heavenly perspective?
No,
Or I don't know, I don't understand your question.
the same thing that the people are doing around Jesus,
We do that.
we do it. The very same thing is happening, and it's happening as we read it. We may not know it's happening, but the idea is, okay, in the story, people figure this out if they stop trying to figure it out and say, what is Jesus trying to tell me? Not what do I think about this? What is he trying to tell me? Right? How many points have we gotten to the point where we said, well, he sounds mean, or what he did wasn't nice, or whatever? That's us saying, we don't understand it, but we're going to put our meaning on it. What Jesus has been doing all through Matthew is, you can do that. You can try to figure it out, and some of you might end up on the right side, but a lot of people are going to end up on the wrong side. Or you can be those that say, Jesus, you're going to tell me who you are, and I'm going to trust you. So while we're reading about these interactions, people with Jesus, we're doing the same thing. And what Matthew's inviting us to do is, don't make the mistake that a lot of people make, right? And especially, again, you can see this. Who are the ones that mess up the most in Matthew's gospel?
Religious leaders.
The religious leaders, one group,
The
The ones that are.
and the
close to him.
disciples, right?
And they're right with him.
Right.
We live with him.
Exactly. Right? And if we're reading this, and we're not just reading it because we like to read biblical literature, but if we read this because we are followers of Jesus, where are we most commonly in the story? We're the disciples.
I have a question.
We all just, hold on just a second. We are disciples, right? They're the disciples. We're the disciples. Just as they're going to go through and learn things sometimes the hard way. One of the nice things is we can learn, well, we weren't the first ones to learn the hard way. They learned the hard way too, and they eventually learn. Most of them, we'll see the end of the story. Matthew's version, they don't all learn. Even by the end of Matthew's story, they haven't all figured it out. But we're invited that having seen what they get to see by Matthew's witness, we can figure it out. Yeah, what's your question?
Okay, so when Jesus first called them to follow him, there must have been something in them that some kind of faith that made them go, leave everything and go.
Sure.
And he saw the possibility in them.
Mm-hmm.
But here we go along the story, and they're making mistake after mistake, and they're doubting him.
Mm-hmm.
So what changed? Where did that initial, yes, I'm going to follow you and believe you,
Mm-hmm.
what happened?
It got harder.
It got hard.
And now we're going to see that it gets the hardest, right? You can follow somebody if they're going to benefit you. You can follow somebody if, well, it's challenging, but you think that their teaching is still the right one. You can follow somebody if you do those two things, and there's a risk to you. But anywhere along the line there, as it gets harder in different ways, you might go, yeah, I was okay with this. I'm not okay with that. Right? I forget the gospel it's in. It's not Matthew. But in one of I think it's in John. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in John. I think it's John 6. Jesus has some very hard sayings. I think it's after he says, whoever doesn't eat my flesh and drink my blood have no life. They have no life in them. And then many people, it says at that point, many people cease to follow him. And he looks at the disciples and he goes, well, how about you? And Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So that's always going to be the choice. Okay, we followed him at this point. It got harder, but we still followed him. Now it's harder. Are we going to continue? And that's our story.
So when things get harder for us or more difficult for us, or we are worrying or getting scared, we're doing the same things that they did.
If we pull back.
If we pull back.
Yes.
Or doubt.
Yeah. Now, what Matthew's inviting us to is Matthew's not writing this in a sense as it happens. Maybe he's taking notes, we don't know. At some point, Matthew is from the perspective of having gone through all of this and then lived whatever life he had between the time Jesus ascends and the time he's writing this. He's writing from that perspective. So he could have written this to be, well, we all ended up finally getting it, right? We messed up a lot, but we finally all got it. Matthew doesn't tell that story. Right? At the very end, I already gave you the ending. Some believed and some still doubted. So Matthew's inviting us into a process that he himself was a part of.
And you were talking about a turning point, and Judas clearly here saw, the shock of this woman pouring this expensive perfume on him. I mean, that's, just, it turned his heart completely. He went from being a follower who stuck with Jesus through all the hard things. And when he saw this, he went to the chief priest.
Mhm. Yeah, and I forget if it's in Matthew's gospel. One of them says that why he gets upset was because he would take money from the treasury. So this woman who's a follower, if she had just given the money to the poor, meaning to his treasure box that he's keeping for them, well, before it goes to the poor, there's another place it's going. So again, I don't remember if that's in Matthew or not. We'll see as we go. But where everyone makes a decision, very rarely in Matthew, maybe never, do we get to see the inside view, right? It doesn't say, and Judas, seeing this, said to himself, I can't do this anymore, or that's a bridge too far, or the straw, the boat. I mean, we don't hear about it, but we know it happens. And again, thinking about what is Matthew telling us? Things can happen, things that you don't expect, things that you misunderstand, things that you don't get if you're just taking Jesus's point of view and your own misunderstanding. Maybe it got you to a certain point. You don't get to rely only on that, right? There's going to be a greater demand, that's the wrong word, but a greater challenge. And what's important is what happens at that next challenge, not just the ones you did 5 steps ago or whatever. We can't get too much more into this. I want to bring on a couple of things in the section before we finish up today. Does Jesus not care about the poor? Because
No, no.
they're right.
The
Yeah,
thing
go ahead.
that strikes me about this is that I try to think about this in our environment and what it's teaching us. We in the church sometimes think, okay, why are we spending all this money on icons or whatever else we adorn our church with? We should be giving more money to the poor, etc., right? Or something else. And it's exactly what they were thinking. It's like, well, why are you pouring this on? We know he's a holy man, but why are you doing this? And this could be used for the poor. Jesus does care about the poor, but he gives us a deep truth, and the poor will always be with us. And he isn't saying that we negate the poor, because he does say we have a responsibility to the poor. But we also have an adoration for our God that we're responsible for too. So I think for me, that's what I hear.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if you look at verse 11, and again, because we've had the blessing of taking our time and looking deeply at what Matthew's telling us, where did we recently hear about the poor?
Well,
25, right? What do we hear about the poor in 25?
that how we treat them is basically, we're doing that to the Lord. How we treat
Yeah.
the poor.
Yeah, that the sheep are the ones that take care of the poor. I mean, to overgeneralize everything he says. But say that again, lady, the way you just said it.
That how we treat the poor is a reflection of how we're doing that for the Lord. How we treat the poor.
Yeah. So somebody, like Rick was saying, could say, well, you got a choice. Put an icon up or take care of the poor. It's one or the other. What Elaine is saying is they are the same. When Jesus said, when you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. When she pours this on his body for burial, he's the poor one, right? He's the one that's about to be tortured and killed. You don't get poorer than that. It's not just his money that's going to be taken. Everything will be taken. His dignity, his clothing, his health, and eventually his life. And so again, he's connecting up. So it's not in contradiction. Some people would read this and go, well, that's contradictory. Actually, if you read both together, the fact that 25 and 26 are next to each other, you really just see a much different view that both Rick and Elaine are helping us see. This is one and the same thing. It's not one or the other. It's one and the same thing. We take care of the poor as a way of caring for Christ, and we care for Christ and love him and adore him. And through that, take care of the poor. Well, we're about out of time. Any quick questions before we wrap up for today? We may come back and look at some of this next week, since we're here next week, right? I think we are here next week.
21st.
I believe so.
We're here.
Yes, we're here, God willing. All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Father.
God bless you all.
Thank you, Father.
We'll see you soon.